Early June brought with it a kind of warmth that seemed specially reserved for the village of Renford, a soft, flattering sun that coaxed roses into bloom and convinced even the most stoic inhabitants that they ought to be outdoors. Thus, the annual St. Mildred's Church garden fete bustled with energy from the moment the first trestle table was unfolded on the vicarage lawn. Mrs. Penelope Harkort, chairwoman of the fete committee, and, as many whispered, chairwoman of anything she could manage to get her hands on, had arranged the stalls with military precision. To her right, the jam-making competition. To her left, the used book stand. And in the middle, positioned with a sense of theatrical flourish, the vicarage's prized raffle table, where a donated silver tea set gleamed in the afternoon light. It was into this harmonious chaos that Miss Jane Marple arrived, walking with her usual steady grace, though her eyes took in every detail with a quiet alertness. She was greeted within moments. "Miss Marple, over here, dear," called young Beatrice Longfellow, waving enthusiastically from the baked goods stall. Beatrice was one of those energetic village girls who never quite lost their sense of wide-eyed astonishment at life, and Miss Marple found her rather refreshing. "My dear, you've made enough scones to feed a regiment," Miss Marple observed kindly as she approached. "Oh, not nearly enough. Mrs. Harkort says we'll have a flood of visitors today. She's terribly worried about the judging, of course. Says last year's scandal must never be repeated." Miss Marple raised a brow. Ah yes, the question of whether Mrs. Harkort's tarts were truly handmade. Beatrice leaned forward conspiratorially. "She purchased the pastry cases, Miss Marple. Everyone knows it, but the vicar wouldn't dare say so aloud." Miss Marple smiled faintly. Human nature, she reflected, needed no grand crimes to reveal itself. Even a jam tart could do. The fete continued in its cheerful way until a subtle shift in atmosphere rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, conversations paused. Mrs. Harkort's spine straightened, for striding through the garden gate was Mr. Leonard Price, chairman of the Renford Parish Council, and a man whose air of self-importance had only grown since his recent decision to improve the town by modernizing the public library. The library's proposed renovations, particularly the demolition of the old south interior wall, had triggered a wave of village disputes. Many felt the changes were unnecessary. Others welcomed fresh space and updated shelving. Mr. Price, of course, championed the cause with vigor, claiming the work would bring Renford into the modern age. Mrs. Harkort moved toward him, face arranged into a smile that carried the rigidity of porcelain. "Leonard, how good of you to attend," she declared. Mr. Price nodded curtly. "I do my best to support village events. Speaking of which," he gestured toward the second raffle prize. "I trust the funds raised will help the Library Renewal Committee." Mrs. Harkort's smile thinned. The vicar has yet to decide where the money will be directed. Miss Marple, passing nearby, noted the flicker that crossed Price's eyes, a swift, suppressed annoyance. She also noticed a woman lingering a few paces behind him. Mrs. Tabitha Rowe, the library's longtime assistant, whose timidity was matched only by the fierce protectiveness she showed for the building.
The doctor says it's
Today,
an unnatural
she looked even
death,
paler
Price.
than usual, clutching a woven handbag as though wishing she could
would you?
disappear inside it. Miss Marple offered her a gentle nod. Tabitha managed a wan smile in return. At precisely 3 o'clock, the tranquility fractured. A sharp cry echoed from the direction of the used book stall, an unassuming corner near the back hedge, manned by retired Colonel Geoffrey Ashbury and a rather precariously stacked assortment of old novels. Miss Marple, along with half the fete, instinctively turned. Mrs. Tabitha Rowe stood frozen beside the book table, her hand trembling as it hovered above a fallen volume. Her face was drained of color. I didn't mean to," she murmured, barely audible. Colonel Ashbury stooped to retrieve the book.
It is with a heavy heart
"Good
I
heavens,
must
woman,
close the
it's only a
fete.
hardback.
There's been
No
trouble.
need for dramatics."
Please, everyone,
But Tabitha shook her
home.
head, eyes fixed not on the
It must
book,
be done
but on
this way,
something
Mr.
behind
Pennington.
it,
There is no
something
other
partially concealed
Yes,
beneath the
Mr.
tablecloth.
Harkort, I understand.
Before the colonel could straighten fully, a wave of gasps surged through the crowd, for lying just beneath the cloth, hidden among the crates of donated books, was the unmistakably
know about
lifeless
the
form
funds.
of a man,
could they know?
eyes open,
Only the
expression
council
frozen
knew.
in shock.
It has to be
Even
them.
at a distance, Miss Marple
enemy is already
recognized him.
here.
It was Mr.
3
Leonard
times
Price.
I warned
The
him.
garden erupted
3
in
times
clamor.
he ignored
Mrs.
me.
Harkort shrieked.
Now look
Beatrice
where it
dropped
has
an
led
entire
us.
tray of scones. Colonel Ashbury muttered a curse he immediately regretted under the circumstances.
Yes.
Only Miss Marple
And rather
seemed
poorly,
still.
I might add.
Her blue eyes narrowed ever so slightly as she took in the scene. The angle of Price's body, the absence of blood, the curious position of his right hand clenched around a library catalogue card as though it were a message or a warning. Police would soon arrive, fluttering about as they always did at such times, eager for simple explanations. But Miss Marple, noting the fine white dust on Price's shoes and the faint musty scent clinging to his jacket, a scent she recognized from her own recent library visit, suspected the answer would not be simple at all. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, she exhaled. This was no accident, and in Renford, where grievances brewed beneath polite conversation, a murder never occurred without a tangle of human motives waiting to be uncovered. The sound of the brass band, which had been cheerfully blaring out a slightly off-key rendition of Rule Britannia, faltered and died away. The vicar, who had been in the midst of a conversation about raffle tickets, found the words drained from his lips. People seemed to draw back in a widening circle from the used book stall, leaving Mr. Leonard Price lying alone under his unceremonious shroud of second-hand novels and faded table linen. Miss Marple stepped nearer with unobtrusive composure. She did not rush or exclaim, that was never her way. Instead, she merely adjusted her hat, as though disturbed only by a sudden breeze, and fixed her gaze on the small details the others, in their agitation, failed to notice. The library catalogue card remained clenched in Price's hand, a thin white rectangle, smudged slightly with sweat, but still legible. Miss Marple tilted her head, disappointed that from this distance she could not read the writing. Still, its presence was remarkable. One did not ordinarily wander about a garden fete with a library card clutched like a talisman. The smell was curious too. Up close, the mustiness was more pronounced. The particular odor of old paper and dust that pervaded places which did not see enough fresh air. Miss Marple had always rather liked that smell in moderation. On Leonard Price, it seemed out of place. A flustered murmur rose in waves. Mrs. Harkort was trembling visibly, her usually rigid self-control beginning to fracture. "This is dreadful," she whispered, dabbing at her forehead with a lace handkerchief. "Dreadful. On vicarage grounds, too. Think of the scandal. The fate will be in the newspapers." The vicar, a pale man whose kindness was accompanied by chronic bewilderment, cleared his throat. "My dear Mrs. Harkort, I hardly think that is our most immediate concern. We must send for the doctor and the police."
Something happened.
"Already
I'm sorry
done,"
to trouble you, Miss
called
Marple.
Colonel
May I come in?
Ashbury, regaining a measure of military efficiency.
Stay
Sent young
where you
Tom
are.
Robbins on his bicycle. "Dr. Havers is on call today. Police will be here presently, no doubt." Miss Marple glanced at Tabitha Rowe. The library assistant had moved only as much as she'd been forced to when people edged away. Her hands still trembled, fingers gripping her handbag so firmly that the knuckles shone white. "You discovered him, my dear." Miss Marple's
where were you
tone
at
was
midnight?
mild, conversational.
I was at home.
Tabitha
I
swallowed.
swear I don't know anything about
I
this.
knocked the
You
book
must
off the
believe
table
me.
by accident.
Look here.
It slid down and the
Document
cloth lifted.
47B.
And then I saw
That connects
her
him
eyes
directly
flickered
to
to
the
the body
docks.
and away again. He shouldn't be here.
We know you were
He
lying,
was supposed
Price.
to be at the library this
We
afternoon.
found this.
There was a meeting
A
about the
photocopy of the
renovation
south
plans.
wall's cross-section.
Indeed. Miss Marple's eyes softened. "And you were to attend too." "No," Tabitha said quickly. "He didn't. Mr. Price didn't ask me.
killer is
He
among
rarely
you.
did.
I know who
only
it is,
catalogue.
and so do
I
some
keep
of you.
things in order.
Who is it?
He makes the decisions." There was a
It can't
bitterness
be.
there, faint but unmistakable.
impossible.
Miss Marple tucked that
If he was
away
in
in the
London
quiet
that
filing
night,
system
then the
of her
alibi
mind.
is a forgery.
Nearby, Beatrice Longfellow had begun to whisper
She
fiercely
froze
to
the
one of the
moment I
other
mentioned
girls
the
from the
drawer.
village shop. "You know they say
Eyes
he's trying to
wide
knock
with a
down
fear
half
that
the
went
library.
deeper than guilt.
Aunt Lydia says the south wall's practically part of the village history. Imagine being the one to find him, poor Miss Rowe. They'll be talking about her for years." "Don't be horrid," the other girl muttered, though she leaned in nonetheless, avid for more. Gossip, Miss Marple knew, spread more swiftly than influenza, and in its own
Knowledge can
careless
be a
way, it
dangerous
bore
thing.
fragments of truth along with its feverish nonsense. People's tongues moved according to their fears, their grudges, and their hopes. Everything they said, and the way they said it, was a kind of evidence. The village doctor, Dr. Havers, arrived hastily, bag in hand and tie askew. He knelt beside the body, his face becoming grave.
We need to talk.
After a
Not
few
here.
professional
The
manipulations
evidence
and a check
doesn't
of
line
the
up.
wrist and throat,
Someone is
he
lying, Miss
straightened with
Marple,
a
and I
sigh.
intend to find
He's
out
gone,
who.
I'm afraid. Been dead a little while, I should say. His brow furrowed. Not long. An hour, perhaps. Maybe less. Though I should hesitate to be precise in all this excitement. There are signs. I would prefer to leave details for the police. Signs of what, Doctor?
I don't like it.
Mrs. Harkort
Her story
demanded,
doesn't match his,
unable
and
to
the alibi
restrain
is full of
herself.
holes.
Of something
Someone is lying,
unnatural,
and I intend to
Dr.
find out
Havers
who.
replied, choosing his words carefully. There's no immediate evidence of a fall or obvious injury, but I should like to examine him properly before saying more. That, Miss Marple thought, meant poison or some other quiet method, a most modern solution for a man bringing modernity to the village. As if summoned by the thought, the police arrived. 2 constables and an inspector whom Miss Marple recognized, Inspector Denton,
Give me the box.
a stout,
You have no right
no-nonsense
to
man
keep it
with a
from
habit
me.
of rubbing
I
at his
want it
moustache
now.
when perplexed. They set about their business with a mixture of efficiency and self-consciousness, aware that half of Renford was watching. Right, Denton said, surveying the scene. We'll need everyone to keep back, please.
The vicar
No
was the one
touching
other
anything.
person who knew
Colonel,
Mr. Price
thank you
took
for
the
your quick
plans.
thinking. Doctor, we'll need your statement. And, Miss Marple, I've no doubt you've already noticed more than the lot of us put together. Miss Marple gave him a faint, almost apologetic smile.
The
One
toast
does
was
see a great
finished,
many things
but
if
the
one has
matter
lived
of
long
Leonard
enough,
Price
Inspector.
remained.
But I am sure
A
you will
bitter
form your own
aftertaste I
conclusions.
couldn't wash
I
away.
expect I shall.
And that's
he
when the
said,
vicar
though without
arrived,
his usual
just
confidence.
moments before the
He
discovery.
eyed the body again, then the catalogue
So the
card.
net is finally
Doctor says it's
closing in.
likely not natural.
You see,
Doesn't
Mrs.
appear to be any
Harkort,
sign
I
of
know
a struggle.
exactly what
So
happened.
either he took something
The question
himself,
is,
which I doubt,
are you
or someone
prepared
gave
to
it to
admit
him,
it?
at a public event, no less. A public event, Miss Marple echoed gently, where refreshments are plentiful, tempers are high, and motives not entirely absent. Denton snorted. Motives? You think our Mr. Price was so unpopular someone would go so far as this?
We'll start on the main
Popularity
floor.
is such a misleading
Johnson, check the
concept,
reading room.
Miss
I'll take
Marple
the
said.
stacks.
One can be admired and resented in equal measure, sometimes by the same person. He gave her a look he could not quite categorize, then turned to Mrs. Patu, who was already preparing to give a statement. Within the hour, the fate had dissolved into a solemn, scattered group of villagers making their way home in subdued clusters. The stalls stood half abandoned, jam jars glinting mournfully, the silver tea set still waiting to be won, scones crumbling on grass
The
where they
envelope
had
contained
fallen.
the only
The
lead
vicar,
we had.
his voice shaking, announced
torn
that the
scrap
fate
of
would be
paper
adjourned until
left
such
by the
time as it is
deceased.
appropriate to consider its resumption, which convinced most people that it would never be resumed at all. As people drifted away, conversations swelled in their wake. I heard Mr. Price had enemies in the council. That business about the funds. Something about misallocation, murmured one villager.
There's nothing left to
Enemies,
discuss.
scoffed
The
another.
decision is final.
You mean
I
Mrs. Harkort?
Very
She
well.
hates anyone making
I'll make the
decisions without her
arrangements.
consent. What about Miss Rowe?
Be careful,
A
Inspector.
third voice chimed in.
That key
All
opens
that
more than
fuss
just a
she
door.
made at the library meeting last month.
I
My
understand
cousin
the
says
risk.
she practically burst into tears when they mentioned demolishing the south wall. Well, if I'd spent my life among dusty shelves, I'd object too. On the gravel path leading from the vicarage gate, Miss Marple walked with measured steps, her knitting bag on her arm. Beatrice hurried to catch up. Miss Marple, do you really suppose someone poisoned him, like in those dreadful novels Aunt Lydia reads? My dear, dreadful novels are very often only reflections of dreadful realities, Miss Marple said kindly, though life, in my experience, is rather less tidy about its endings. Beatrice shivered. Do you think it had something to do with the library? I think, Miss Marple replied, that when a man dies
Mr.
clutching
Price's
a library
question
card,
about the library's
having quarreled with
confidential
half the village
purposes.
over alterations to that very building, it is unwise to dismiss the connection. People take their institutions very seriously, you know. Churches, post offices, and libraries. They are the anchors by which small communities keep their sense of themselves. They reached the gate, where Tabitha Rose stood alone, as if unsure where she ought
They
to
won't
go.
believe me.
Her eyes were fixed on
The
the
whole
distant
village
outline
thinks
of
I'm
the library
responsible, but
tower,
I assure
visible
you, my
beyond
dear,
the yew trees.
I fear for my
its
own
small
life.
clock face catching the fading sun. Isn't it strange, Tabitha said quietly, as Miss Marple drew near, that he should die here instead of there? The library feels wrong without him, and yet it feels as if it has been spared something too. Buildings are like people, Miss Marple murmured. They
You
have
call
histories.
this an investigation?
Sometimes those
It's
histories are
nothing
not
but a
quite as simple as
superstition
we
hunt.
think. Tabitha looked at her sharply, then looked away. He
If
said
we
the
assume
south
this
wall
isn't
was
Random,
useless,
then
she
this name
whispered.
here.
Old stone,
Yes.
old plaster.
That connects to the
Nothing
shipping
there but
manifest we
dust,
found
Miss Rowe,
earlier.
he said. We must be
Every
practical.
folktale
And what did you say?
is
Miss
rooted
Marple asked.
in reality.
Tabitha's hands tightened on her handbag. I said that some walls ought not to be pulled down, that you never quite know what might have been built into them. It's an interesting thought, Miss Marple said. Sometimes people
We
hide
lock
things
things
in
away,
walls.
don't we?
Money, letters,
Not because they are
objects they
lost,
wish
but
others
because
never to
facing
find.
them is
And sometimes,
agonizing.
of course, what's hidden is not in the wall at all, but behind it, in memories, in consciences, in human hearts. Tabitha shivered, though the evening air was still mild. I should go, she said. There will be questions. They'll come to the library. They'll want to see his papers, his files. I expect they will, Miss Marple agreed pleasantly. You must rest if you can. Today has been a great strain on you. As Tabitha departed down the lane, Miss Marple stood for a moment, watching her retreating figure. The library, with its calm stone facade and ivy-touched windows, loomed in the distance like a patient, silent witness. Behind one of those walls, old,
lie to me,
cracked, and
Tabitha.
unremarkable
I know
to the
you
casual
took the
eye,
documents.
lay a secret.
Please, Inspector,
Miss Marple
I didn't
felt
do
almost
anything.
sure whether it belonged to Mr. Price,
true, I
to
tell
Miss
you.
Rowe,
They're calling
or to
it
someone else
murder now.
entirely.
But who
She
would
did
have
not
known?
yet know. But
Everyone
human
knew.
nature had
It
taught
was
her
only a
this.
matter of time.
Where there is a wall someone is determined to tear down, there is very often something, or someone, equally determined to keep what lies behind it from ever seeing the light of day. Miss Marple remained a moment longer by the vicarage gate, the murmurs of departing villagers drifting past her like faint echoes. The faint bunting
Be
fluttered
careful out
weakly
there
in the
today.
diminishing breeze, its colors
The mood in
fading
the
with the
village has
light.
changed.
The tranquility of early evening returned to Renford slowly, hesitantly, as though the village itself were unsure whether it was permitted to settle after such a jolt. Miss Marple,
Tell me,
however,
Tabitha,
knew that
are
the
you
calm
quite
was
certain
nothing
there is
more than
nothing
surface
in this
tension,
library that
a thin
frightens you?
glaze over a deep well of unease that would soon begin to ripple. She walked at her usual measured pace toward the lane that wound between the vicarage and the high street. Behind her, Inspector Denton and his constables were organizing the removal of Mr. Price's body and securing the area. Such procedural matters did not concern her for the
It's
moment.
not the wall.
What mattered were the trembling
But what
edges of
people
human
believe is
behavior
in
she
it.
had witnessed in the last hour. Tabitha's terror, Mrs. Harkort's indignation, and the flicker of resentment behind many polite masks. As she reached the crossroads, she noticed a familiar figure waiting near the churchyard wall. It was Dr. Havers, arms folded, gaze trained on the sky. He started when he noticed
It was a
her.
dangerous
Oh, Miss
thing.
Marple, heading home
And it
for a cup of
destroyed
tea and
my
a little
family.
reflection, she replied. A strenuous afternoon, wouldn't you say? He let out a short, humorless laugh. Strenuous doesn't begin to cover it. I'm not often called to examine bodies at a garden fete. The whole business is unsettling and unusual, she added gently, which often means that something unusual lies behind it. She watched him carefully. Dr. Havers was not a man easily ruffled, but now there was a shadow on his face that spoke of
Talk,
more than
Tabitha.
shock.
I'm running
Did
out of
something
patience.
trouble you
Where
in
did you
particular,
hide it?
Doctor? He hesitated,
I don't know anything.
rubbing the bridge of his nose,
swear I don't.
a gesture Miss Marple recognized
dare
as
you
a
mention
sign
the
of
Harkort
internal
name in
conflict.
connection with
It's
that
well,
sordid affair.
between ourselves, those
We've
signs
kept
I
that
mentioned,
secret buried
there
for
were faint
40
traces
years.
about the mouth, not the sort I'd expect from a natural collapse. I suspect he ingested something not intended for pleasant afternoons.
A poison?
Quite all
Miss
right,
Marple
my
said, though
dear.
softly, so no passerby might overhear.
You are safe
Havers grimaced.
now.
Likely. But what sort, I
Mrs.
cannot say
Harkort
without
knew
proper
what her
tests.
father was doing in
Denton will push
43.
for clarity, but I
They
doubt
both
we'll have it
knew,
immediately.
and they let those
That
men
is often the
die.
way with poisons, Miss Marple murmured. Though one must remember, they rarely act alone. A poisoner must supply the motive, the means, and the opportunity.
This office will
She
be
paused,
sealed.
and often, a very calm mind. Havers nodded, though uneasily. There are at least 36 people who could have
Evidence.
slipped something to him. He spoke with everyone.
Evidence.
Ate a scone, I noticed. Drank lemonade. But poisoners aren't usually so random. No, Miss Marple said. They rarely are. For a moment, her thoughts drifted to Tabitha Rowe, so shaken, so
The human
pale,
heart is
and
a
yet
dark
strangely
place,
composed
Denton.
beneath the panic.
And
Not
these
composed in a
walls
guilty
hold
way,
more than
but
just
in a manner that
secrets.
suggested she had been frightened long before she discovered the body. And fear, Miss Marple knew, made people keep secrets. After bidding the doctor good evening, she continued down the lane, the library's silhouette square, dignified, stubborn, coming into view. The windows glimmered faintly with leftover sunlight, but the building itself felt dark, watchful, It seemed almost to wait. Across the street, a door opened abruptly. Mrs. Dorothea Clemens, who ran the village post office, stepped onto her small porch. Her keen eyes brightened at the sight of Miss Marple, as though she had been hoping for precisely this encounter. "Miss Marple, have you heard the latest?" she called. Miss Marple allowed herself a patient smile. "My dear Mrs. Clemens, the latest often changes every few minutes. Which version have you received?" Mrs. Clemens hurried closer. "They're saying, well, some are saying that Mr. Price had an argument at the library yesterday. Raised voices, quite the scene." "Indeed." Miss Marple folded her hands calmly. "And with whom?" "Hard to say. Young Peter Miles swears he heard it through the open window when he cycled past, but you know how he exaggerates. Still, he insists Miss Rowe was crying in the reading room afterwards." "Poor thing," Miss Marple murmured. "She seemed very distressed today." "Oh, I dare say." Miss Clemens leaned in. "But people don't cry over simple disagreements, do they? Not unless something very important was at stake." Miss Marple's expression remained mild, though her thoughts sharpened. "Perhaps not. Good evening, Mrs. Clemens." She left the postmistress satisfied to have delivered her news and continued toward her gate. The evening quiet closed around her. Birds settling in hedges, the distant rumble of a tractor retreating down a far-field road, the occasional bark of a dog. Inside her cottage, the kettle boiled promptly, and Miss Marple set out a single cup with a small slice of seed cake. She took her seat by the window where her geraniums thrived, looking out at the dimming street, though her gaze was turned inward, sifting through thoughts as though sorting threads of wool. Mr. Leonard Price had enemies, not dramatic, violent enemies, but the quieter sort who grew resentful of his brusque ways and rigid ideas. He had pushed hard for changes to the library, brushing aside objections and dismissing concerns. That alone could stir passions. Yet murder was never caused by a single grievance. It was brewed from many small ones, simmering until someone saw no choice but to act. Miss Rowe's trembling hands, Mrs. Harkort's indignation at losing authority, the council rumors, the south wall, such a wall. Miss Marple had lived long enough to know that walls had purposes beyond holding
And you,
up
Inspector?
roofs. They concealed, they kept, and they kept memories, even when people forgot. Her musings were interrupted by a brisk knock at the door. She rose, opened it, and found Inspector Denton standing there, coat unbuttoned, hat in hand.
How could you let this
His
happen?
expression
The whole
was the
town knows
familiar
our secret
mixture
now.
of respect and discomfort
It wasn't
he wore
my
when
fault. You were the
consulting
one
her.
who spoke
"Miss
first.
Marple," he said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but, well, you've a way of noticing things. There's something I'd like to ask." "Of course, Inspector. Do come in." He stepped inside awkwardly, as though afraid to disturb the coziness of the sitting room.
Wait for me.
"It's about the library card we found in the deceased's hand. You wouldn't happen to know what number or category it belonged to. You're a frequent visitor, I believe." Miss Marple nodded. "I do enjoy the library, yes. Did you manage to read the card?" "That's the odd thing." Denton frowned. "I did. It wasn't for a book. It was part of the old filing system,
Thicker than it should
something
be,
catalogued
almost
years
a
ago but
yard.
never fully integrated into the modern index. The
It is the
card was
nature of
labeled
denial
merely
that puzzles
Document
me
47B.
Why did Mrs.
No
Harkort
title,
not inquire
just
into
a
the rumor?
reference.
Because,
How
Denton,
intriguing,
she already
Miss
knew
Marple
the
said
truth.
quietly. "More than that," Denton continued, leaning forward. "We asked Miss Rowe about it. She told us that 47B refers to a locked drawer in the library office. Only she and Mr. Price had the key, said she'd never known him to use it. And yet the card was in his hand," Miss Marple murmured, suggesting he had used it, or intended to. Denton massaged his moustache. "I'll be going to the library tomorrow morning. Formal search, but something tells me this. 47B business might be significant. I suspect you are right." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Rowe claims she hasn't opened the drawer in years, but she looked frightened
We should
when I
speak
mentioned
with the
it.
oldest
Not
residents
guilty,
of Renford.
just
Their
terrified."
memories, though fading,
"Yes,"
might hold
Miss
the key.
Marple said softly.
I suppose they might.
"Fear often
Very well.
hides more than guilt." He met her eyes. "Do you think she knows something about the motive? About why someone might wish Mr. Price dead?" "I think," Miss Marple said after a moment of quiet reflection, "that Miss Rowe may know of something Mr. Price discovered or was about to discover, and that knowledge, Inspector, can be a dangerous thing." Denton rose, troubled but steadier. "We'll find out tomorrow. Good evening, Miss Marple." When he left, closing the door behind him, Miss Marple returned to her chair. Her tea had cooled, but she didn't mind. Her thoughts were far warmer, spinning with purpose. A locked drawer. A man determined to modernize what others wished protected. A frightened librarian who understood the weight of history. And, most importantly, a library wall, old, untouched, stubbornly standing. Whatever Mr. Price had found or hoped to find had been important enough to kill for. Miss Marple suspected the truth slept not with him, but with the stones he sought to disturb. And as she gazed into the fading night, she felt certain that the wall would not remain silent for long. Morning arrived in Renford with deceptive brightness, sunlight spilling across the thatched roofs and tidy hedgerows as though determined to sweep away the previous day's shadows. But beneath the cheerful facade, an unmistakable strain ran through the village. Curtains twitched earlier than usual. Neighbors lingered at garden gates, speaking in hushed tones that pretended not to be gossip, but inevitably became precisely that. And though the church clock chimed its steady quarter hours, time felt somehow slower, as if the village itself were holding its breath. Miss Marple observed all this as she finished a modest breakfast and prepared herself for a short walk. She had slept little, her thoughts circling around the image of Leonard Price's tightly clenched hand, the mysterious catalogue card, and the fear she had seen flickering behind Tabitha Rowe's eyes. Fear, she had learned long ago, was the most revealing emotion of all, far more honest than anger or grief. Fear seldom lied. She stepped out onto the lane, greeted by the crisp fragrance of morning dew. Her intention was not to intrude upon the police in their duties, but to be nearby when events inevitably unfolded. And as she approached Renford Library, the building standing with its square tower and ivy-draped facade, she saw Inspector Denton and two constables already stationed by the entrance. They acknowledged her with brief nods. "Miss Marple," Denton said, stepping forward. "You're early, not that I'm surprised." "Old habits," she replied. "I find matters rarely wait for one to be fully rested." Denton almost smiled. "Well, we're about to begin our search. Miss Rowe is inside. She insisted she should be present." "That seems wise," Miss Marple said, though she was thinking something different. It was not wisdom but apprehension that had drawn Miss Rowe here, a fear not merely of what the police might uncover, but of what they might misunderstand. They entered the library together. The atmosphere within was markedly cooler than outside. Tall shelves of well-worn volumes lined the walls, and the faint smell of paper and dust, usually a comfort, hung today like a question yet unanswered. Tabitha Rowe stood behind the front desk, her posture stiff, her hands clasped so tightly Miss Marple feared she might bruise her own fingers. "Inspector Denton," she said quietly, nodding. "I've brought the key you asked for." "Thank you, Miss Rowe," Denton replied, taking the small brass key. "We'll look at the drawer first. After that, I may need access to Miss Price's office." Tabitha nodded, but her throat bobbed with a nervous swallow. She gestured toward a narrow side corridor leading to the
Harkort
administrative
family
room.
has indeed been
The three
here
of
a
them
long
walked
time,
together,
but
Miss
this letter
Marple keeping a
confirms my
respectful
suspicions
pace a
about
few
the
steps
vicarage
behind.
incident.
The room
Captain
itself was
J.
sparsely
Miller.
furnished. An old wooden
The name
desk,
echoed back
filing
to 43,
cabinets, a tall
a
cupboard,
ghost from
and
the
a
War
window
Department
overlooking a
files.
patch of untended garden behind
This
the
revolver
building.
was found hidden
Denton
in the
went
stacks.
straight to the desk.
It
This
matches
one,
the ballistics
Tabitha
from the
nodded
murder of
again,
Mr. Harrison.
her breath hitching. The bottom drawer on the left. Denton crouched, inserted the key, and turned it. The lock clicked, the drawer sliding open with a reluctant groan as though disturbed from a long sleep. Inside was a stack of manila envelopes, a few loose sheets of yellowing paper, and a slim burgundy notebook. Everything looked untouched for years. Denton lifted the notebook carefully. "That's it? 47B?" "Yes," Tabitha
They
whispered.
said it was impenetrable.
Mr. Price said once that the drawer was full
They
of
were
old
wrong.
nonsense records from past
They say she
subsidies,
isn't even his
inventories,
wife. The real one
letters
lives
from
in the
donors.
city.
He said none of it
Heavens, the
mattered.
scandal.
"And yet he came here
In our
yesterday,"
village.
Denton said,
Miss
flipping
Marple,
open the
you must
notebook.
listen to me.
"Why?"
He's gone
Miss
mad.
Marple
He
stepped a
knows
little
we
closer.
saw him.
She
Slow
could see
down,
the
child.
writing.
Tell me
Neat,
exactly what
small,
happened.
consistent. Names, dates, notes on the acquisition of various historical items, parchments, maps, donations to the village archives. Nothing that appeared overtly scandalous, but it was not the obvious items that mattered. It was the implications. "These entries stop abruptly," Miss Marple observed gently. "Here, see? A list of archival items, then nothing for several pages." Tabitha swallowed hard. "That's because the project was abandoned years ago. The south wall, well, we were meant to install new cabinets there, and the records were to be reorganized.
He's gone.
But funds fell through, and everything was left as it was. But the drawer was locked, Denton said,
Mrs.
and
Harkort
only you
wasn't
and
at the
Mr.
parish
Price
hall
had the
last
key.
night. I heard
Why
she was
keep it
seen heading
locked if
east on
nothing
the
was
midnight
important?
train with a suitcase full of
Tabitha's lips
cash.
parted, then closed again. Her silence trembled in the room. Miss Marple spoke softly, almost soothingly. Sometimes things are locked away not because they are valuable, but because they are painful. Tabitha flinched as though struck. Denton frowned but did not press the point. Instead, he turned his attention back to the drawer, rifling through the envelopes. Receipts, old correspondences, a faded photograph of a long-forgotten library committee. Nothing noteworthy.
There's a space
until he
behind
reached the
this
last
wall.
envelope. It was thicker than the others and sealed with aging red wax. The impression stamped into it was barely visible, an emblem of some kind. Perhaps once clear, but now crumbly and faint. "What's this, Miss Rowe?" Denton asked. Tabitha stared at it, blinking as though she'd never seen it before, or hoped never to see it again. "I don't know. It wasn't there when I last checked. At least I don't think it was." Denton held it up
We
to the
simply
light.
cannot
No
allow this to
address,
happen.
no
It goes
label.
against everything we
Strange
stand
place
for.
for it.
Council has already
Miss
approved the
Marple
plans.
watched
It's a
Tabitha
done deal.
carefully
Then the
now.
council is
The woman's
corrupt.
eyes were fixated on the envelope, but not with curiosity, with dread. Her shoulders had drawn inward, and her breathing grew shallow. "I think,"
The
Miss
doctor
Marple
says it's
said
an
quietly,
unnatural death,
that this
Price.
envelope is not new, that someone
know
may have
anything
placed
about
it
that,
where
would
Mr.
you?
Price would find it, someone who wished him to open it. Tabitha's head snapped up. "I never touched it. I don't know what it is." Denton studied her. "No one is accusing you, Miss Rowe, but we will need to open it." "No," her voice cracked, sharp, desperate. Then she caught herself, retreating into silence as though afraid she had revealed too much. Denton raised an eyebrow but did not relent. With deliberate care, he lifted the brittle wax seal with the tip of a letter opener. The envelope surrendered with a quiet tear. Inside was a single folded sheet. Denton opened it. Miss Marple leaned just close enough to see. Tabitha covered her mouth with a trembling hand. The
It is
message,
with a heavy heart
written in
that I must
hurried,
close
slanted
the
ink,
fet.
was simple
There's been
and
trouble.
chilling. The truth
Please,
is
everyone,
behind the wall.
head home.
He must not be allowed to find it.
It must be done
Denton
this way, Mr.
exhaled a
Pennington.
long
There is
breath.
no other option.
Well, that's
Yes,
clear
Mrs.
enough.
Harkort, I
Miss Marple
understand.
felt a soft, familiar tightening beneath her ribs, the sensation she always experienced when the heart of a mystery stirred beneath the surface. Someone had feared what Mr. Price
They
might
know about
uncover.
the funds.
Someone
could
who
they
knew
know?
the south wall
Only the
held a
council
truth
knew.
valuable enough,
It has to be them.
dangerous enough to kill
The
for.
enemy is already
Denton
here.
turned sharply to
3
Tabitha.
times I
"You must
warned him.
explain this.
3
What
times
wall?
he ignored
What
me.
truth?" Tabitha
Now
shook
look
her head
where
violently.
it has led
"I don't
us.
know. I swear I don't.
Look here.
Whoever wrote it, please,
It
Inspector.
seems they tried
I
to
didn't."
cover something up.
Her words
Yes,
dissolved into strangled
rather
sobs.
poorly, I might
Miss
add.
Marple, moved by a compassion that never dulled with age, stepped toward her. "My dear, no one expects you to know everything, but you must understand. If someone believed Mr. Price meant to open that wall, they may have believed he would discover something they wished kept hidden." Tabitha looked at her with wet, desperate eyes. "But what could possibly be hidden? It's just stone. Old stone. Old stone often remembers
I'm telling
more
you,
than
the
people,"
return address was
Miss
fake.
Marple said
He
softly.
never lived there.
"And secrets left too
You
long
must
in
have
the
seen
dark
something suspicious in the
sometimes give
mail."
birth to very dangerous fears." Denton moved toward the door. "We're sealing this office for now, and Miss Rowe, I'll need you to stay available for questioning later." Tabitha nodded weakly, sinking into the nearest chair. Miss Marple followed the inspector out. The moment they stepped into the corridor,
There is a sealed
Denton muttered under his
chamber
breath,
behind the
"This has
south
just got a
wall."
good deal more complicated." "Yes," Miss Marple agreed, her voice
But
low
that's
and
impossible.
more
It
human.
can't be true.
Human. "Oh yes, walls do not hide truths
Dear
on their
Lord,
own. People
not again.
put truths there. People build the walls
Look
around
closely
them,
at the
and
south
people
wall.
fear their collapse."
I saw
Denton
something
looked at
hidden
her,
there, I'm sure of
uneasy.
it.
"I don't suppose you have any idea whose handwriting that message was." "Not yet," Miss Marple replied. "But I do know this. Whoever wrote it believed the south wall was not merely old. They believed it was dangerous, and that belief, true or not, has led someone to murder." As they stepped back into the library's dim main
Mrs.
hall,
Harkort,
Miss Marple felt
might
the
I
weight of the
inquire
air
as to
shift,
the source of
as though
your
the building
information?
itself knew that at last the first crack had appeared in what had been hidden for decades. And now, the truth would begin to seep through. The inspector's footsteps echoed faintly
Reliable.
through the quiet hall as he moved toward the front desk, where the constables waited for instructions. Miss Marple lingered a moment near the threshold of the administrative room, casting a thoughtful glance back at the drawer now hanging open like a mouth that had spoken too late. The air felt different, as though the letter, with its stark warning, had altered not only the course of the inquiry, but the atmosphere within the library itself. Even the dust motes swirling in the pale beams of morning light seemed to drift with heavier purpose. Tabitha Rowe remained seated in her chair, shoulders curled inward, eyes fixed on her trembling hands. She had not spoken again since her outburst. Miss Marple took a quiet step toward her, not wishing to startle her further. She had found over many years of observing human nature that it was often in the silences, those soft, fragile gaps between words, that truth began to surface. "This message," Miss Marple said gently.
Mr. Price's
"Does it
question
remind you
about
of
the
anything?
library's
Any
confidential
conversation?
purposes.
Any concern Mr. Price may have mentioned to you?" Tabitha shook her head, but her breath shivered with it. No one would write that. No one. Everyone loved the library, even those who complained about the dust and the hours. No one would. She stopped, voice quavering. "It doesn't make sense. It rarely does at first," Miss Marple replied.
The whole village
Sometimes
thinks I'm
people hide their
responsible, but I
deepest
assure you,
motives
my
beneath
dear,
quite ordinary
I fear for my
behavior.
own life.
And sometimes, my dear, love of a place can be as fierce as fear of change. Tabitha blinked rapidly and seemed to shrink further into herself. "I didn't think Mr. Price would actually move forward with anything. He talked so much, but nothing ever happened. But then he started making inquiries. Surveyors
You
came,
call this an
men measuring
investigation?
stones.
It's
He was
nothing but a
pushing, and
superstition
that
hunt.
frightened you?" Miss Marple asked softly. "No," Tabitha whispered.
If we
then
assume this
hesitated.
isn't random,
Not
then this
frightened
name
exactly.
here.
More that
Yes.
I felt something
That connects
was being
to the shipping
disturbed,
manifest we
as
found
though the
earlier.
building objected,
Every
as though someone had
folktale
reason to keep him away from
is
that
rooted
wall.
in reality.
She caught her breath and pressed a hand to her forehead. "I sound like a fool." "Not at all," Miss Marple said. "We are often closest to truth when we speak without attempting to rationalize it." Before
We
Tabitha
lock
could
things away,
respond,
don't we?
Inspector Denton reappeared.
Not because they are lost,
He had
but
removed
because
his hat
facing them
and
is
was rubbing the back of
agonizing.
his neck in frustration. "Miss Rowe, I'll be sending a constable here during operating hours, and until we understand what this truth behind the wall refers to, I suggest no alterations be made to the premises." "That wall has stood for centuries, Inspector," Tabitha murmured. "It is unlikely to alter quickly." Denton ignored the comment and motioned for Miss Marple to accompany him outside. She followed, retrieving her coat from the hook near the entryway. They stepped into the fresh morning air, where the faint hum of the village was beginning to rise. A milk cart rattled by. Children's voices drifted from the direction of the green. Life went on, as it always did, even in the presence of
Don't
murder.
lie to me, Tabitha.
Denton
I
exhaled
know
sharply.
you took the
A
documents.
threatening letter,
Please,
a locked
Inspector, I
drawer,
didn't do anything.
a frightened librarian, and a
It's
dead
true, I
council
tell you.
chairman
They're
found
calling
at
it
effect,
murder now.
all
But who
pointing
would
to a
have known?
library wall.
Everyone
He shook
knew.
his head.
It was only a
It doesn't
matter of
add up.
time.
"Oh, on the contrary," Miss Marple replied, clasping her hands before her. "It adds up very tidily, only we do not yet know the value of the numbers." He shot her a weary glance. "You think the letter's genuine, then?" "I do. The tone, you see. It wasn't dramatic or contrived. It was desperate.
Be
Someone
careful out
believed
there
they were
today.
protecting something, or someone."
The mood in
You
the
mean the
village has
murderer
changed.
believed that?" Denton asked with a frown. "Possibly. Or possibly the letter writer is not the murderer at all, but someone caught in the same web for a different reason." Denton
Tell
gave
me,
a grunt
Tabitha,
of dissatisfaction.
Are you quite certain there is nothing
"I'd like
in
nothing
this
better
library
than to
that
interview
frightens
every
you?
villager who ever set foot inside this library, but I'm afraid that would take weeks. I need to narrow it down." Miss Marple looked toward the distant rooftops of Renford, where smoke from early hearth fires rose into the sky. "You have already narrowed it, Inspector, though you may not realize it." "I have. Oh yes.
It's not the wall,
If Mr. Price was poisoned,
but what
the
people
opportunity
believe
was
is in
limited.
it.
The fete attracts many people, but the refreshments were served in small areas. Ask yourself who would have been near enough, calm enough, and motivated enough to slip something into his food or drink." Denton groaned. Half the village brought him lemonade. He was forever shaking hands, greeting people, boasting about his renovations. He could have
It
been
was a
poisoned
dangerous
anywhere.
thing.
Half the village, Miss
And it
Marple said mildly.
destroyed my family.
But not all. And consider, if the motive was connected to the library, it may be prudent to begin with those most closely involved in its management. Denton paused, reflecting. "Miss Rowe, Mrs. Harkort, perhaps. She practically runs every committee, and the council members who opposed Price. And one must not forget," Miss Marple added thoughtfully, that resentments do not always stem from public quarrels. Private grievances can be far more potent. He nodded reluctantly. I'll draw up a list. At that moment, the library door creaked open behind them. Tabitha emerged, her steps hesitant.
Fragments
Inspector
of
Denton,
conversation.
she called softly.
Whispers
There's something
in
else.
the dark.
He turned. Yes?
Try just
Tabitha
there,
looked
Inspector.
painfully
Behind the
uncertain,
moulding.
as though weighing the risk of speaking. About the wall.
It's hollow.
The south wall.
There's a space
It's
here.
odd. In what
It's
way?
dreadful about
Denton
the body in the
asked
library,
impatiently.
Tabitha.
Tabitha twisted
You
her
don't seem
fingers
surprised
together.
by it, though.
When Mr. Price had the
Did you know
surveyors
him
in
well?
last week, I overheard something. One of the men said the interior measurements didn't match the exterior. He said the wall was thicker than it should be. Much thicker. Denton raised an eyebrow. How much thicker? Almost by a yard, Tabitha whispered. He said it was impossible
I
unless
didn't
something
push
was
it. I was
built
reaching
into
for
it,
the book,
or a space
and it
had
just
been
fell
sealed
off
off
the
long
table.
ago. A quiet stillness
when I saw
settled
him.
between them. Miss Marple felt that small, familiar tingle again, intuition sharpening into near certainty. A sealed space, she repeated softly,
The south
or a hidden
wall.
room. Tabitha nodded nervously.
They said it was
Mr. Price told them to
impenetrable.
keep it quiet until
They
he could
were
look
wrong.
into it. But he was excited.
They say she isn't
He said
even
it
his
might be
wife.
valuable.
The real one lives in the
Historically,
city.
he meant.
Good heavens,
Something the
the
village could
scandal.
use to justify
And in
funding.
our village.
He was planning to have the
Miss
wall
Marple,
opened
you
this
must
week.
listen to me.
Miss Marple
He's gone
exchanged
mad.
a glance
He knows
with
we
Denton,
saw him. Slow
though her
down,
thoughts were
child.
moving more
Tell me
swiftly
exactly
than she
what
allowed
happened.
to show. Someone had feared that discovery. Someone had feared what might lie inside a hidden space, and someone had acted before Mr. Price could reach it. Denton straightened, a renewed urgency hardening his features. Miss Rowe, thank you. That changes things. I'll need the surveyors' names. I'll get them, Tabitha whispered, retreating inside. Miss Marple watched her go, then turned back to Denton, her voice barely above a murmur. Inspector, I believe the motive lies not in what Mr. Price wished to change, but in what he was about to uncover.
He's gone.
He nodded grimly. We'll find out soon enough. Miss Marple touched his arm lightly.
Mrs.
Do be
Harkort
careful,
wasn't at the
Inspector.
parish hall last
Those
night.
who fear
I heard she
discovery
was
are
seen
often the
heading
most
east on the
unpredictable.
midnight train with a
She walked
suitcase
away
full of
then,
cash.
slowly, her steps steady upon the cobblestones. She had no desire for haste. Haste clouded the mind, and she needed a clear mind now, for the threads of the mystery were weaving themselves faster with each revelation. Somewhere behind the library's south wall, behind layers of stone and silence, lay a truth someone had killed to protect. And if that truth were to surface, Miss Marple suspected the village of Renford was not
hollow.
yet prepared for the consequences. The cobblestone
There's a
path
space
beneath Miss
behind
Marple's
this
feet
wall.
still held a faint trace of the morning's chill, but her thoughts were elsewhere, threading together fragments of conversation, gestures, and fears. She walked without hurry, letting the village move naturally around her. A cart rolled past with fresh bread for the bakery. A dog barked at a bird perched too smugly on a fence. A farmer tipped his cap from across the green. All of it was familiar, unthreatened by the dark stirrings beneath its surface.
We simply
She
cannot
had
allow
nearly
this to
reached the
happen.
turning
It goes
toward her
against
cottage
everything
when
we
she
stand
heard
for.
hurried
The council has
footsteps
already
behind
approved
her.
the plans.
She
It's a
turned
done
just
deal.
as
The
Beatrice
council is
Longfellow
corrupt.
came skidding to a breathless stop at her side. Miss Marple, oh thank goodness, Mother said you would know something, and I simply couldn't wait another moment. My dear,
The doctor
Miss
says
Marple
it's an
said,
unnatural
steadying
death,
the
Price.
girl with a gentle hand. Your lungs
You
appear
wouldn't
to
know
be
anything
far in
about that,
advance
would
of
you?
your good sense. What is it? Beatrice gulped in air. Mrs. Harkort, she's at the parish hall. She's summoned half the committee. She says she has information about Mr. Price's death and that she intends to set the record straight. I thought you ought to know before she makes a terrible fuss. Miss Marple hid her concern behind a mild smile. Mrs. Harkort is quite fond of setting records straight, usually in the direction most flattering to herself. Yes, but she's angry, Miss Marple. Really angry. Properly bristling. And she said something peculiar. She said she knew what Mr. Price was hiding. This was enough to prompt Miss Marple to move at once, though still with her characteristically
It is
measured
with a heavy
pace.
heart that
They
I must
headed toward
close
the
the
parish
fete.
hall, a
There's been
small
trouble.
stone building beside
Please,
the church,
everyone,
where Miss
head home.
Harcourt's voice could already be heard
It must
spilling
be
out
done
through
this
the
way, Mr.
half-open
Pennington.
doorway.
There is no other
Inside, several
Yes,
villagers,
Mrs. Harkort,
mostly
I
committee
understand.
members and a few who never needed a reason to attend a meeting, were gathered around her. Mrs. Harkort stood at the center, flushed with indignation. clutching her handbag as though
They
it
know
were a
about the
weapon.
funds.
Her voice
How could
quivered
they
with
know?
righteous
Only the
outrage.
council knew.
I will not
It
have
has to be
Renford's
them.
reputation tarnished
The
by
enemy is
unfounded
already
gossip
here.
or
3
insinuations.
times
Leonard
I
Price
warned
may have
him.
been insufferably
3 times
arrogant,
he
but he was a
ignored me.
public official,
Now
and there
look
must be
where it
propriety.
has led
Of
us.
course, murmured Mr.
Look
Pennington,
here.
who chaired the choir despite
seems
having
they
no
tried to cover
discernible
something
musical
up.
talent.
Yes.
But I will tell
And
you
rather
this,
poorly, I
Mrs.
might
Harkort
add.
continued, tightening her grip on the bag. He was planning something no decent village committee could approve of. Miss Marple slipped quietly into the back of the hall. Beatrice hovered beside her like an anxious sparrow. What exactly was he planning, Mrs. Harkort? Asked Mrs. Clemens, arms folded skeptically. Mrs. Harkort lifted her chin. He meant to exploit the library renovation for
I'm
political
telling you,
gain.
the return address
Oh
was
yes,
fake.
I heard
He
it
never
all
lived
from a
there.
source most reliable.
You must
He
have
had
seen
found
something
something that
suspicious
would
in the
elevate
mail.
his status in the county council, something he refused to share with anyone else. And what was that something? Pennington asked, leaning forward eagerly. Mrs. Harkort hesitated, then declared with theatrical emphasis, a sealed chamber behind the south wall. A collective gasp rose, though
There
Miss
is a
Marple
sealed
noticed a ripple
chamber
of discomfort
behind
among the
the
older
south
villagers,
wall.
those who remembered more than they said. Mrs. Clemens
But that's
frowned.
impossible.
And how
can't be
exactly would a
true.
sealed room improve his political prospects?
Dear
Mrs.
Lord,
Harkort
not
sniffed.
again.
He believed it contained records of
Look
historical
closely at the
significance,
south wall.
perhaps even valuables.
I
He
saw
said
something
the county
hidden
board
there,
would
I'm
be
sure of
obliged to
it.
recognize his contribution to cultural preservation, a self-serving notion, obviously. Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. That was not consistent with the eagerness she had seen in Mr. Price's eyes when he spoke of modernizing. Ambition, yes. Greed, possibly. But she suspected something more complex had drawn him to that wall. And
Mrs.
who told
Harkort,
you this? Miss
Might
Marple's
I
gentle
inquire
voice
as to
floated
the
through the
source of
hall.
your information?
Mrs. Harkort stiffened at being questioned, then recovered with a thin smile. Well, a reliable source. I am not at liberty to say. Miss Marple regarded her kindly.
Reliable.
A source who may not exist, or one you fear implicating. The flush on Miss Harkort's cheeks deepened. Really, Miss Marple, I don't see why you must twist everything into something sinister. I twist nothing, Miss Marple said, her tone
There is
mild.
no need
I
to
only
be
observe
frightened,
that your
my
account
dear.
contradicts
I
Miss
assure
Rose.
you,
She told
we
the
will get to the
inspector she was
bottom of
unaware
this
of any
dreadful
significant
business.
discovery, and
What
that
do you make
Mr.
of it, Miss
Price had
Marple?
said nothing to her. Mrs. Harkort
It
faltered,
appears to be the
then
missing
sniffed
evidence,
again.
Mr. Denton.
Miss Rowe is hardly reliable. All that weeping and fainting. One wonders how she keeps the library organized at all. Miss Rowe wept, Miss Marple said softly, because she is frightened. Those who lie are seldom frightened before they are accused. The room quieted. Mrs. Harkort's lips tightened, though something guilty flickered behind her eyes. But before anyone could press her further, the parish hall door swung open. Inspector Denton
It's
strode
dreadfully
in,
late. Has something
breathless and
happened?
visibly
I'm sorry to
irritated.
trouble you, Miss Marple. May
Everyone
I come
stay
in?
where you are, he barked. Mrs. Harkort.
Stay
What exactly
where
do you
are.
mean by claiming Mr. Price found a hidden chamber? She sputtered. I was merely explaining. Well, explain it to me, he snapped. Because I have just come from the surveyor's office, and they've confirmed something rather remarkable. Mr. Price requested a private meeting with them yesterday evening, after closing hours. He wanted to see the full architectural sketches, and he left with a photocopy of the south
Where were
wall's
you at
cross-section.
I
A murmur
was at
rippled through the
home.
hall.
I swear
And
I don't know
Denton
anything
continued
about
grimly.
this. You must
They
believe
recall
me.
him saying, word
here.
for word, if this is
Document
accurate, I must
47B.
open that wall immediately. Miss
That connects
Marple
him
exchanged
directly
a
to the
glance with
docks.
Beatrice, who looked both terrified and
We
thrilled.
know you were lying,
Mrs.
Price.
Harkort pressed a hand to her
found
throat.
this.
Inspector,
A photocopy of the south
I may have
wall's
heard something
cross-section.
similar. I only wish to... But Denton interrupted her. Save your explanations until I ask for them. Right now, I need everyone to stop
Killer
speculating
is
and
among
stay
you.
available for
I
questioning.
know who it is,
With
and
that,
so do some
he
of you.
motioned for Miss
Who is
Marple
it?
to step aside
No.
with him. When they reached the
can't
corner of
be.
the hall, Denton
But
lowered
that's
his
impossible.
voice. I don't like this.
If he was in
Too many
London that
different
night,
stories.
then the
Too
alibi
many
is a
half-truths and half-truths. Miss Marple murmured,
She froze the
are often
moment I
more
mentioned the
revealing
drawer.
than lies. He exhaled sharply.
Eyes wide
We
with
need
a
to
fear
examine that
went
wall,
deeper than guilt.
but not yet. Not without proper equipment, and not without knowing who else might be invested in what's behind it. Miss Marple looked toward the window, where the sunlight cast long shadows across the wooden floorboards. Someone feared that Mr. Price was close to discovering something worth killing to protect. She paused.
Knowledge can
Inspector,
be a dangerous
tell me,
thing.
were the surveyors the only ones who knew Mr. Price took the plans? No, Denton said. One other person knew, someone who spoke to him after the meeting ended. Miss Marple looked at him steadily. And who was that? Denton hesitated. The vicar. He said Mr. Price was troubled, agitated, and he wrote something down before leaving. Miss Marple felt that prickling certainty
Someone
again.
is lying, Miss
Something was
Marple, and I
closing
intend
in,
to find out
faster
who.
now. A hidden chamber, a warning written in haste, plans stolen from a surveyor's office, and a village where secrets had begun, after long silence, to stir awake. The south wall was no longer just a curiosity. It was the heart of everything, and someone she knew would do anything to keep it sealed.
Her story doesn't match
Inspector
his, and
Denton
the alibi is
seemed
full of
momentarily
holes.
distracted
Someone
by the
is
bustle
lying,
inside
and I
the hall.
intend to find out
But Miss
who.
Marple knew his mind was already working ahead, turning over facts like stones in a garden, looking for what lay beneath. She herself felt the faint but familiar tightening of intuition as pieces of the puzzle subtly shifted. It was not yet a picture, but it was beginning to take shape. They stepped outside, allowing the committee's chatter to fade behind them. The breeze had grown warmer, lifting the scent of the churchyard's early roses. Denton
Give
drew
me
in
the
a deep
box.
breath
You
as
have
though
no
bracing
right to
himself.
keep it from me.
You mentioned
I
the
want
vicar,
it now.
Miss Marple reminded gently. You said Mr. Price wrote something before leaving him. Yes, Denton scowled. The vicar said Price asked for a quiet place to collect his thoughts. He gave him the vestry for
The
a few
vicar was the
minutes.
one other person
When he
who
returned,
knew Mr.
Price was
took
gone,
the plans.
but he'd left a torn scrap of paper on the table. Do you still have it? I do. Denton reached into his coat, producing a small evidence envelope. Inside was a rough-edged piece of lined paper,
The toast was
the ink
finished,
slightly
but
smudged
the
as though
matter of
written in
Leonard Price
agitation.
remained.
Only 3
A
words
bitter
adorned it,
aftertaste I
uneven,
couldn't wash away.
rushed. Not
And
what
that's when the
expected.
vicar arrived,
Miss Marple
just
studied it
moments
carefully,
before the discovery.
her eyes narrowing ever so slightly.
So the
a
net is
curious
finally
statement,
closing in.
meaningless, Denton
You see,
muttered.
Mrs.
Or
Harkort,
cryptic.
I know exactly
I don't
what
know
happened.
which. Perhaps
The question
neither,
is,
Miss Marple said,
are you
handing
prepared
it
to
back.
admit it?
Sometimes the most ordinary words reveal the strongest truths, Inspector. It appears Mr. Price had discovered something he found surprising, and perhaps dangerous, Denton added. Miss Marple inclined her head. It would seem so. At that moment, a figure hurried toward them across the green, tall, thin,
Start on
and
the main
moving
floor.
with nervous urgency.
Johnson, check the
It was
reading
the
room.
vicar,
I'll take
his
the stacks.
expression troubled. Inspector Denton, Miss Marple, thank heavens you're still here. He clutched his prayer book to his chest as though it might steady him. I'm afraid I've remembered something. Something about Mr. Price yesterday.
The name,
Denton straightened. Go on.
Man,
The vicar looked from one
in
to
the
the other,
letter.
swallowing. When he came to the vestry, he wasn't only agitated, he was frightened, truly frightened. I've seen parishioners distressed before, but this was different.
The
He
envelope
kept glancing
contained
over
the
his
only
shoulder,
lead we
as
had,
if expecting someone to follow
a
him.
torn scrap
Miss
of
Marple
paper
listened closely.
left by the
Fear
deceased.
again. Always fear. Did he say why? She asked. No, the vicar said. But he asked if the library had ever been used for confidential purposes. He said someone had warned him, though he did not say who, that some things were hidden there long ago which were not meant to
There's
be
nothing left to
unearthed.
discuss.
Denton's
The decision
eyebrows
is
shot
final.
up.
I agree.
Hidden by whom?
Very well.
I asked him that as
I'll
well.
make the arrangements.
The vicar replied, voice quavering.
Be careful,
He said
Inspector.
he didn't know.
That
He
key
only
opens
said
more than just a
some
door.
people make walls for privacy,
I
others for
understand the
protection.
risk.
And then he left. A quiet unease settled between them. Miss Marple folded her hands. Thank you, Vicar. That is extremely helpful. The vicar gave a feeble nod and retreated toward the church door, leaving the inspector and Miss Marple alone once more. Denton shook his head. This is turning into a superstition hunt. Warnings, hidden chambers, sealed walls. This isn't a village mystery anymore. It's a folk tale. Every folk tale, Miss Marple said gently, is rooted in something real. The question is simply what that root is. Denton grunted, unconvinced, and Miss Marple did not press him. She knew he was wrestling with the same unease she herself felt tingling beneath the surface.
Price's
The
question
sense that
about the
something
library's
bigger, older,
confidential
and far more
purposes.
entangled than a petty village quarrel was at work. They walked together a few steps across the green before Denton spoke again. I'll need to question the vicar more formally, and Mrs. Harkort, and most likely half the committee. There's too much talk, too many motives forming all at once. As he said this, Miss Marple's gaze
won't
drifted
believe me.
across the green toward a
The
small
whole
figure
village thinks I'm
hurrying along the
responsible,
lane,
but I assure you,
holding
my
a
dear,
stack of papers
I fear
close
for
to
my
her
own
chest.
life.
It took her only a moment to recognize Tabitha Rowe, but something was wrong. Her pace was brisk, too brisk, her face pale and strained, Her eyes darted anxiously toward the library whenever she passed a gap in the hedges. Miss Marple touched Denton's arm lightly. Perhaps you should attend to Miss Rowe, Inspector.
It's nothing but a
Denton followed her
superstition,
gaze and swore softly. She was supposed to remain at the library.
If we
Without
assume
waiting,
this isn't
he hurried
random,
toward
then
her.
this name
Miss
here.
Marple followed more slowly, watching
That connects
Tabitha's
to the shipping
movements
manifest we
carefully.
found earlier.
Miss Rowe, Denton called.
Every folk
Where are you
tale
going? Tabitha
is
stopped
rooted
abruptly,
in
clutching the
reality.
papers even tighter. The moment she turned toward them, Miss Marple saw the tremor in her hands. I needed to fetch something, she stammered. Some records from the parish hall. I
We
forgot
lock
about
things
them.
away, don't we?
Denton frowned.
Not because
You
they
said
are
earlier
lost,
you
but
hadn't
because
been there in
facing
weeks.
them is agonizing.
Tabitha froze. And in that stillness, Miss Marple felt the unmistakable shiver of truth slipping free from its hiding place. My dear, she said softly, you are frightened of something inside that library, aren't you? Tabitha's throat bobbed. No, I'm only... You did not want to be alone there, Miss Marple continued. Not after learning that Inspector Denton intended to investigate the wall. Denton watched her intently. Miss Rowe, what are you afraid of? Something in Tabitha gave way then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a small, exhausted sound. The sigh of someone who could no longer bear the weight of silence. It's not the wall, she whispered. It's what people believe might be in
Don't lie
it.
to me, Tabitha.
Miss Marple
I
stepped
know
closer.
You took the documents.
What do they believe, my dear?
Please, Inspector,
Tabitha's
I didn't
eyes
do
brimmed
anything.
with tears. That something was hidden there
True,
long
I tell
ago.
you. They're calling
Something
it
dangerous.
murder now.
Something
who
that
would have
destroyed
known?
a family.
Everyone
Denton
knew.
stiffened.
It was only a matter
What
of time.
family? Tabitha hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. The Harkorts. A silence followed, a deep, startled stillness that seemed to stop even the wind. Miss Marple felt her mind sharpen. Mrs. Harkort, her indignation, her eagerness to direct suspicion elsewhere, her secrecy about her
careful out
reliable
there
source,
today.
her fierce protectiveness of
The mood
village
in the
committees,
village has changed.
and perhaps her own history. Miss Rowe, Miss Marple said gently, tell us what you know. Tabitha shook her head miserably. It's only a rumor, a very old rumor.
Tell me, Tabitha,
about
are you
Mrs.
quite
Harkort's
certain there is
father,
nothing in this
something he was
library that
accused of doing
frightens you?
during the war, something that was never proven. They said the library stored documents, evidence, but then the wall was sealed. No one spoke of it again. Evidence, Denton repeated, stunned. Miss Marple nodded slowly. If Mr. Price believed something of that nature was hidden behind the wall,
It's not the
his
wall.
eagerness to open it becomes
But
quite
what people
understandable.
believe is in
And
it.
someone might kill to keep it from being opened, Denton said. Tabitha flinched. Miss Marple touched her hand lightly. Thank you, my dear. You've been braver than you know. Denton stood rigid, processing her words. If that chamber holds something incriminating about the Harkort family, Miss Marple finished the thought for him. Then
It was
Mrs.
a
Harkort's
dangerous
desperation
thing.
to control the narrative may be
And
more
it
than simple
destroyed
vanity.
my family.
The inspector straightened with renewed urgency. I need to speak with her at once. Miss Marple watched him stride back toward the parish hall, but she did not follow. Her gaze drifted toward the library, looming quietly at the far end of the green. Whatever lay sealed within that wall had not wanted to be disturbed for decades. But now it was stirring, pushing its way back into the present, and someone in Renford was determined to keep it buried, even if it meant killing
Talk,
again.
Tabitha. I'm running out
Inspector
of
Denton's
patience. Where
stride
did
was
you hide
brisk,
it?
almost
But I don't
severe
know
as he crossed
anything.
the green toward the parish
swear
hall.
I don't.
Miss Marple watched him
How
go,
dare you
her
mention the
expression
Harkort
composed
name in
but
connection with
thoughtful.
that sordid
She knew the
affair.
inspector well enough
We've
to
kept that
recognize
secret
that although
buried
his
for 40
instincts were
years.
sharpening, urgency could cloud vision just as easily as it could illuminate truth. And truth, she felt, had begun peeking through cracks rather than stepping
It's
boldly into
quite
view.
all right, my
Tabitha
dear.
lingered beside her, wringing her hands
You
in
are
anxious
safe
circles.
now.
I shouldn't have said anything, she
Mrs.
whispered.
Harkort knew
Mrs.
what her father was
Harkort will
doing
be
in
furious.
43.
She'll say I'm
They
repeating
both
nonsense.
knew, and they
She'll
let
say
those
I'm
men
hysterical.
die.
My dear, Miss Marple replied gently. Truth has a way of revealing itself at precisely the moment it must. Hysteria rarely offers facts as calmly as you just did. Tabitha gave a faint, tremulous smile, then wiped her eyes. Do you really think something is in that wall? I think, Miss
Evidence.
Marple said, that human beings seldom seal away
Evidence.
empty spaces. Whatever is behind that wall, someone believed it best forgotten. A shiver passed through Tabitha. I hope the inspector is careful. So do I, Miss Marple murmured. They began walking slowly
The
toward
human
the library
heart is a
again.
dark
Not
place,
by
Denton.
intention, but by some quiet
And
pull
these
the building
walls hold
exerted,
more
as
than
though it
just
had become the
secrets.
gravitational center of every thought in Renford. The morning bustle on the green felt curiously distant. A couple of villagers, recognizing Miss Marple, paused as though tempted to ask questions, then thought better of it. Even gossip had softened into whispers today. When they reached the library gate, Tabitha hesitated. "I should go inside," she said reluctantly. "Someone ought to be there, even if no one comes." Miss Marple touched her arm lightly. "If you feel uncomfortable, ask one of the constables to remain with you." Tabitha nodded gratefully and stepped inside. Miss Marple stood a moment longer on the footpath, watching the door close behind her. She sensed, quite distinctly, that the library was not finished with them yet. A few minutes later, Inspector Denton emerged from the parish hall. His expression was stormy. He approached Miss Marple with a mixture of irritation and baffled determination. "She denies everything," he said without preamble. Miss Marple did not feign surprise. "Mrs. Harkort has always been a woman of strong posture, Inspector. Denial can be a way of preserving that posture. This wasn't just denial. This was outrage. She insists her family has no such history, no such scandal, claims the very suggestion is slander. And yet," Miss Marple said mildly, "she did not ask what the rumor was. She protested its existence without inquiring into its nature. That, Inspector, is rarely the reaction of someone wholly ignorant." Denton stared at her, then let out a frustrated breath. "I hate that you're right so often." "It comes from watching people closely," she replied with a soft smile. "Something you do as well, even if you don't realize it." He ran a hand down his face. She also said that Mr. Price brought her no such information, made her no confidences, and that she barely spoke to him yesterday.
You were there
But
that
Beatrice
night, weren't you?
Longfellow
Tell me what
swears
you
she
saw.
saw them arguing
I saw
near the
nothing,
church gate an
Inspector.
hour before the fete
You're
began.
grasping at shadows.
"Contradictions," Miss Marple murmured. "The more they multiply, the closer we come to understanding which of them is meaningful." Denton looked toward the library. "We need to examine that wall." "Yes," Miss Marple agreed softly. "But the moment you do, whoever fears the truth within it may take drastic
How
measures."
dare you?
Denton's
I have
eyes
absolutely
narrowed.
no idea
"You think
what
the
you're
killer
talking
may
about.
strike again?"
I deny
Miss Marple
everything.
didn't answer immediately. The sunlight glinted off the library windows, turning them into small squares of brightness, but she felt the coldness behind them. "Fear," she said at last, "is a powerful motivator, and desperation even more so. If someone acted once to keep a secret hidden, they may feel compelled to act again, especially if they believe time is running out." Denton's jaw tightened. "Then I'll double the watch."
Good day to you.
He started
And you,
toward the
Inspector.
library, but Miss Marple gently caught his sleeve. "Inspector, might I make a suggestion?" He paused. "You usually do. I believe," Miss Marple said carefully, "that before you open that wall, you should consider speaking with the oldest
How could
residents
you
of
let this
Renford,
happen? The whole town
those who
knows
were
our
adults
secret
during
now.
the war or shortly
wasn't my
after.
fault. You were the one who
Rumors of
spoke
buried
first.
scandals tend to leave faint traces in memories, faded perhaps, but not erased." Denton considered this. "Names, Mrs. Godfrey," Miss Marple said, "old Mr. Finch,
Inspector.
and Mrs. Dunwoody. Though do be
Wait for
prepared for a
me.
great many digressions about her hydrangeas." Denton allowed himself a brief smile. "I'll start with Mrs. Godfrey. She's sharp despite her age." "Yes," Miss Marple said, "and she has a rather acute memory for anything involving the Harkorts." She began to walk with him down the lane. "Do you happen to know,
wall.
Inspector, whether Mrs. Harkort's father
Thicker than
served
a
in any
TV,
official
almost a
capacity during
yard.
the war?" "Harkort," Denton frowned.
It is
"I've
the
not
nature of
checked.
denial
Should
that
I?
puzzles me
People in
most.
positions
Why
of
did Mrs.
authority
Harkort
sometimes
not
found
inquire
themselves
into the
surrounded by
rumor?
sensitive
Denton, she
documents,"
already
Miss
knew
Marple
the
replied.
truth.
"And such documents, if misplaced or concealed, can have very long shadows." Denton muttered something under his breath, but nodded. They reached the crossroads, where the path forked toward Orchard Row and toward the church. Before Denton could decide which direction to take, they heard footsteps approaching, measured, deliberate. Miss Marple turned to see Colonel Ashbury marching toward them, his face unusually tight. "Inspector Denton," the colonel called. "A word, if you please. Something rather strange has happened." Denton
A
stiffened.
sealed space.
"Strange in what way?" Colonel Ashbury reached them,
sealed
slightly out of
space.
breath but soldierly as ever. "Someone
We
tried
should
to break
speak with
into
the
the
oldest
library early
residents
this
of
morning."
Renford. Their
Both Miss
memories,
Marple
though
and
fading,
Denton straightened.
might hold the key.
"What?"
I suppose
Denton
they might.
demanded.
Very
"When?"
well.
"Just before you arrived," Ashbury said. "I walked my dog at dawn, as you know. Came past the library around 6:30. Saw a figure near the south wall. Looked like they were examining it. By the time I called out, They took off across the green. Could you identify them? Denton asked sharply. No, Ashbury said with obvious frustration. They were bundled up, coat and hat, and the early light was poor. But I'll say this, they moved quickly, very quickly, almost as if they knew the terrain well. Miss Marple felt a quiet, sinking certainty settle in her chest. Inspector, she said softly, I believe the killer fears the wall may reveal what they hid, and now they fear someone else may reach it before you do. Denton swore, then turned to Ashbury. Did they interact with the wall in any way? Tools? Damage? Ashbury shook his head. Not from what I could see, but they were certainly inspecting it, looking for something. Miss Marple's gaze drifted toward the library again, imagining the shadowed figure pressing their hands to the stone, listening, almost pleading for reassurance that the past remained locked away. Inspector, she murmured, you must not delay speaking with Mrs. Godfrey.
Regarding
And
your
perhaps
father,
with Colonel
Mrs.
Ashbury
Harkort.
as well. He may know more than
What
he
was
realizes.
his official capacity?
Denton nodded grimly. I'll go at once.
Secrets on
And
top of
Inspector,
secrets.
Miss Marple
How
added
am I
softly,
supposed to crack
take
this
care not
wide
to
open when
underestimate the
everyone
lengths
clams
someone
up?
might go to prevent you from opening that wall. Denton left at a brisk pace.
I'm afraid I have
Miss Marple
grave
remained
news
where she
concerning
stood,
the shipment.
the breeze tugging slightly
We
at
must
her
act
shawl,
quickly.
her eyes fixed on the
The
quiet
library was hit
library
at
whose secrets
0300.
trembled just
Whoever
beneath the
these men
surface.
are, they mean
Someone
business.
had risked being seen,
building itself is
risked
no longer
everything
safe.
to ensure the truth stayed hidden, which meant only one thing. The truth was close. Very close. Close enough, perhaps, that the next move would be the most dangerous of all. Inspector Denton's departure left a strange stillness in his wake, as though the very air held
The
its
fingerprints
breath,
at the wall
waiting
confirm
for
it.
the next disturbance.
He's acting out
Miss
of pure
Marple did not
desperation
move
now, Miss
immediately.
Marple.
She
There's no
remained
telling what
standing on
he'll
the
do
edge of the
next.
green, her eyes fixed upon the library's weathered stone. The building appeared perfectly ordinary, quiet, dignified, entirely harmless.
Were there any tools
and yet
left
she
behind,
sensed,
Ashbury?
with the
Any
clarity of
damage at
long
all?
habit,
I told you,
that a
Denton,
tide
there
was
was
shifting
nothing.
within its
No
walls.
tools, no damage,
Something long
nothing.
concealed was pushing upward, threatening to emerge. Colonel Ashbury lingered beside her, looking agitated in a way she rarely saw. He cleared his throat. I say, Miss Marple, do you truly believe there's something hidden in that wall? Something someone might kill to protect? She turned her gentle blue gaze on him. I believe that many terrible offenses, large and small, have been committed not out of malice, Colonel, but out of fear. And fear, as you yourself must know from your service, can make even decent men behave most indecently. Ashbury's jaw tightened, though whether from memory or discomfort she could not say. Then the sooner Denton gets to the bottom of it, the better. Yes, Miss Marple agreed softly, though I rather suspect the truth will not be found where the inspector currently looks. He blinked. Not in the wall. Oh, the wall may contain something. Quite likely it does, but understanding why it was placed there, and by
south
whom,
wall.
requires history, Colonel, and memories.
said it was
and you are one of the few
impenetrable.
remaining in Renford who
They
might
were
recall the
wrong.
library as it once was.
They say she isn't
Ashbury's
even his
lips
wife.
thinned.
The real one
war
lives in
years
the
were
city.
chaotic, Miss
Good
Marple.
heavens,
Lots
the
of
scandal.
documents passing through.
And in our
Lots of
village.
secrecy. I couldn't
Miss
possibly
Marple,
recall
you must
everything.
listen to me.
She
He's
regarded
gone
him
mad.
kindly.
He knows we
Nor
saw
would
him.
anyone
Slow
expect
down,
you to.
child.
But small
Tell me
things
exactly
matter.
what happened.
Snatches of conversation, unusual comings and goings. The Harkorts were here then, were they not? He shifted. Old Mr. Harkort was on the parish council at the time, yes. And the library, Miss Marple continued gently, was occasionally used for storage when the village offices became overcrowded. Do you recall anything at all about that storage? Any unusual activity? Anyone guarding something too closely? Ashbury hesitated just long enough to reveal that he did. He cleared his throat again, sturdier now. I recall men outsiders bringing crates one night.
He's gone.
Crates bound with metal straps, heavy ones. Said they were parish archives, but they didn't behave like
Harkort
men
wasn't at the
handling
parish
dusty
hall
papers.
last night.
And
I heard she
Harkort
was
was
seen
there,
heading east on the
nervous,
midnight
if I
train
had
with
to
a suitcase
describe
full
it,
of cash.
kept checking the windows. And afterward, Miss Marple prompted with an encouraging nod. Afterward, the crates were moved inside, into the library. Old building was sturdier back then, they said. Less risk of damp. He paused. A month later, the south interior wall was reinforced. I remember thinking it odd, wasteful. Reinforced, Miss Marple repeated. Not repaired?
It's hollow.
No. Reinforced, thickened, sealed.
There's a space
He swallowed.
behind this
Never
wall.
opened again. She touched his sleeve lightly. Thank you. You've been exceedingly helpful. Ashbury looked unsettled. Do you think those crates are still there? I think, Miss Marple said gently, that whatever occupied those crates, whatever frightened Mr. Harkort enough to hide it so thoroughly, may well lie behind that wall. Ashbury paled slightly. Then, without another word, he excused himself and strode across the green, his dog trotting at his heels. Left alone, Miss Marple resumed her walk. She did not go
It's a
home.
done deal.
Instead, she wandered toward the churchyard, where the memorial stones basked quietly in the sun. Birds trilled from the yew trees, and the hum of a passing motorcar floated
The
faintly
doctor says
from
it's an
beyond the
unnatural
hill.
death,
Her
Price.
steps slowed as she reached a bench and
You
sat,
wouldn't know anything
hands
about that,
folded
would you?
atop her cane. She stared ahead, but her mind spiraled inward. A sealed wall, crates delivered in secrecy, a note in Leonard Price's hand, not what expected, a warning letter. He must not be allowed to find it. Mrs. Harkort's agitation, Tabitha's trembling fear, someone trying to inspect the wall at dawn. Every piece pointed toward a single conclusion. Someone knew what hid behind that wall. Someone feared its exposure, and someone had been desperate enough to silence Leonard Price. But she could feel, without yet seeing, another layer beneath, a subtler thread. Something about the timing, the behavior, the contradictions,
It is with a heavy
particularly
heart
Mrs.
that I must
Harkort's
close the
contradictions.
There's been
People
trouble.
lied for many reasons,
Please,
to
everyone,
protect
head
themselves,
home.
to protect others, or
It must be
sometimes
done
simply
this
to
way, Mr.
preserve a
Pennington. There
carefully
is no other
crafted
option.
story of themselves.
Yes, Mrs. Harkort.
As these
I
thoughts
understand.
coiled and uncoiled, she witnessed a movement by the side gate of the churchyard. Mrs. Harkort herself swept through, walking briskly, her face set into a rigid mask
They
of
know about the
composure,
funds.
but
How
not
could
quite
they
rigid
know?
enough.
Only the
Beneath
council
her
knew.
immaculate exterior,
to be
something
them.
was fraying.
The
She
enemy
did
is
not
already
notice Miss
here.
Marple on the bench
3
until she was
times
nearly
I
past.
warned him.
Oh,
3
Mrs.
times he
Harkort
ignored
stopped
me.
abruptly, her
Now
features
look
arranging
where it
themselves
has
into a
led
polite
us.
expression. Miss Marple,
Look here.
I did not see you there.
It seems
I
they
shan't
tried to
detain you
cover
long,
something
Miss
up.
Marple
Yes.
replied pleasantly.
And rather
I
poorly,
only wish
I
to
might
ask a
add.
trivial thing, if I may. Mrs. Harkort stiffened almost imperceptibly. Of course, though I must say, I am very much occupied. These dreadful events have placed great strain upon all of us. Naturally, Miss Marple said, but I was curious. When you said earlier that Mr. Price intended to use the library renovations for personal gain, did he tell you that himself? Mrs. Harkort hesitated.
I'm telling you,
Well,
the return address
not in
was
so many
fake.
words,
He never
in
lived
any
there.
words at all. Miss
You must
Marple
have seen
asked
something
with gentle
suspicious in the
insistence.
mail.
Mrs. Harkort bristled. Really, Miss Marple, I don't care for your insinuations. I have served this community faithfully for decades. I should hope that counts for something. It does indeed, Miss Marple said kindly. And yet you seemed quite distressed when the inspector informed you that the wall may
There is a
contain, shall we say,
sealed
historical
chamber
matter of
behind
some
the
consequence.
south wall.
Harcourt's eyes widened. He said no such thing. Miss Marple
that's
merely
impossible.
smiled.
It can't
Not
be
aloud,
true.
no. There was a beat, a split second where Mrs.
Dear
Harcourt's
Lord,
breath
not
caught.
again.
Her hand tightened involuntarily
Look
around her
closely at
handbag.
the south wall.
Good day, Miss Marple.
I
she
saw
said
something
abruptly,
hidden there, I'm
turning
sure
away.
of it.
But as she hurried off, she walked faster than dignity typically allowed. And that, Miss Marple mused, was more revealing than anything she had said. She sat for several minutes after Mrs. Harcourt's departure, allowing the warm sunlight to brush her cheek while her mind traced patterns with quiet precision. The Harkort family, a
Mrs.
secret
Harkort,
sealed away during the war,
Might I inquire
evidence
as
that
to the
someone
source of
feared,
your
a
information?
daughter who would defend her father's memory at any cost, and Leonard Price, who had stumbled too near the truth. A sudden thought chilled her. If Mrs. Harkort feared the chamber's contents, she might not have been the only one. She rose abruptly, a rare urgency propelling her. Her steps quickened across the grass toward the library, where Tabitha Rowe waited alone. Alone with fear thickening the very air around her. When
is
Miss
no
Marple
need to
reached
be
the library
frightened, my
gate,
dear.
she found it
I
ajar.
assure you,
That in itself
we will
meant
get to the
nothing.
bottom of
But
this
inside,
dreadful
she heard
business.
voices, one anxious, one cold and sharp. She moved silently inside the entryway. There, in the dimness of the main hall, stood Tabitha Rowe and a tall, broad-shouldered man towering over her. His back was to Miss Marple, but she recognized his stance at once. Mr. Harkort, Mrs. Harkort's eldest son. He was gripping Tabitha's arm. I told you, he hissed, not to say a word. You were supposed to keep quiet. I tried, Tabitha stammered. They asked me questions. I couldn't lie. You should have lied.
Mr.
he
Price's
snapped.
question
If the
about the
inspector
library's
tears down that
confidential
wall,
purposes.
Miss Marple stepped forward. I believe, she said calmly, that Miss Rowe has lied quite enough for other people's comfort. Mr. Harkort spun around, his face draining of color. Miss Marple, this is nothing to do with. But it was too late. She had seen the desperation in his eyes.
They won't
And
believe
desperation,
me.
she knew,
The whole
had already
village thinks
claimed
I'm
one life
responsible,
in
but I
Renford.
assure you, my
She
dear,
feared it was
I
about
fear
to
for my
claim
own
another.
life.
For a heartbeat, the library seemed to hold its breath. Dust floated in frail shafts of light, suspended as if the entire room had stilled in anticipation. Miss Marple did not raise her voice. She simply stood with that quiet, unshakable composure that had startled many an agitated soul
You call
into
this an
stillness. But
investigation.
Mr. Harcourt's
It's nothing
grip on
but a
Tabitha's arm
superstition
only
hunt.
tightened. "You shouldn't have come here," he said through clenched teeth.
If we
"This
assume
is a
this isn't
private matter.
random, then this
Private
name
matters,"
here.
Miss Marple
Yes.
replied gently,
That connects
rarely
to the shipping
involved
manifest
dragging a
we found
frightened
earlier.
young woman about in a public
Every
building.
folk
He
tale
released Tabitha abruptly,
is rooted
perhaps
in
realizing how it
reality.
looked, and stepped back. But the tension in his shoulders betrayed him, the tautness of a man cornered not by walls, but by truth. "You don't understand," he said, running a hand through his hair.
We lock things
"All this
away,
nonsense
don't we?
about the wall,
Not
about my
because they are
grandfather,
lost, but because
it's nothing but
facing
old
them is
gossip.
agonizing."
Miss Rowe is exaggerating." Tabitha shook her head, shrinking away. "I didn't exaggerate. I only said what I heard." Miss Marple moved slightly to place herself between them. "And you, Mr. Harkort, did you hear it too? Or did your mother tell you what she feared the inspector might discover?" He stiffened. "My mother has nothing to do with this. Perhaps not the recent incident," Miss Marple agreed, her voice mild. "But she does seem quite determined to ensure that whatever lies behind that wall stays undisturbed." He faltered. "It isn't about the wall." "Then what is it about?" Miss Marple asked softly. For a moment she thought he might refuse to answer, but then the words spilled from him, jagged and
Don't
breathless.
lie to me, Tabitha.
She was humiliated.
I know you took
he
the
burst out.
documents.
"My mother,
Please,
she spent
Inspector,
her
I
whole
didn't do
life trying to
anything."
restore our family's reputation.
It's true,
You
I
don't know
tell
what
you.
it was
They're
like growing
calling
up
it
with
murder
whispers about my
now. But
grandfather.
who would have known?
People said
Everyone
ridiculous
knew.
things,
It was only a
that he
matter of
hid
time.
evidence, that he covered up crimes, that he betrayed people during the war. It was all absurd. Absurd, Miss Marple echoed quietly, and yet important enough to frighten you. He clenched his fists. "It wasn't true. It was never true. My mother has worked so hard to keep anyone from dredging
Be
it up
careful
again."
out there today.
Then this Price fellow came along,
The mood in
sniffing
the
around
village has
old structures, talking about opening walls, digging up the past. Mother told him to stop, told him it was harmful, pointless, but he wouldn't listen. Tabitha's voice trembled.
Tell me,
"But why
Tabitha,
confront
are you
me?
quite certain
I've
there
done
is
nothing.
nothing in this
Because,
library that
Mr.
frightens
Harkort
you?"
said sharply, "you were helping Denton, feeding him stories, encouraging him to open that wall, and if he does, he did not finish. He didn't need to." Miss Marple stepped closer, her gaze kind but unwavering. "Mr. Harkort, Leonard Price was poisoned at a fete full of
It's not the
villagers.
wall,
Whoever did it had reason,
what people
strong
believe is
reason
in
to
it.
stop him from unveiling the truth hidden behind that wall. I must ask you plainly, did you poison him?" His face twisted in shock. "What? No! Good heavens, no! I would never, Miss Marple. I may be protective of my family, but I'm not a murderer." Tabitha's breath trembled at her lips. Miss Marple
It was a
observed them both
dangerous
carefully.
thing,
Mr. Harcourt's fear
and it
felt real,
destroyed my
tangled in
family.
pride, shame, and the fierce loyalty of a son, but there was no malice in his tone, only desperation. She spoke gently. "Then why try to intimidate Miss Rowe?" He groaned softly and sank onto a nearby chair, burying his head in his hands. "Because I thought she'd tell them everything. And then the inspector would open the wall, and then everyone would start whispering again. I couldn't bear it. Mother couldn't bear it." Miss Marple touched the back of the chair
Price's
lightly.
question about
"If
the
your
library's
grandfather was innocent,
confidential purposes.
then no truth behind that wall can harm you." His voice was muffled. "You don't understand. Even the suggestion of scandal ruined her mother's life once. It nearly ruined hers too." Miss Marple's expression gentled. "Oh, I understand all too well. But fear, Mr. Harkort, often grows in darkness. When the light
They won't
finally
believe
falls
me.
upon it, it is
The whole
rarely as
village
monstrous
thinks
as
I'm
we
responsible,
imagine."
but I assure
Before
you,
he
my
could
dear,
respond,
I fear
a
for my
sharp
own
sound
life.
echoed through the hall, a clatter from the far end of the library. Tabitha startled. Mr. Harkort rose abruptly. Miss Marple's gaze snapped toward the sound. "Someone else is here." The building fell silent. No footsteps, no breath, no voice. Only
You
the
call
faint
this an
creak of old
investigation.
timber settling.
It's nothing
"Stay
but a
behind me,"
superstition hunt.
Mr. Harkort said instinctively, though his voice quavered. He stepped
If we
cautiously
assume this
toward the
isn't
corridor
random,
leading
then
to
this
the
name
administrative
here.
room.
Yes.
Miss Marple signaled
That
Tabitha
connects
to
to the
follow
shipping
her
manifest we
quietly.
found
They
earlier.
stopped just short of the
Every
doorway.
folktale
A shadow moved inside.
is rooted
Denton
in
stepped into
reality.
view, holding a lantern and wearing an expression caught between exasperation and alarm. "There you are. I've been knocking on the front door for several minutes." Relief washed visibly over Mr. Harkort,
things
though
away,
he tried
don't
to
we?
hide it. Miss
Not because
Marple
they are
exhaled
lost,
softly.
but because facing
Tabitha
them is
nearly collapsed with
agonizing.
it. Denton lowered the lantern. "What's going on here?" I heard someone shouting from the street. Miss Marple stepped forward. "A misunderstanding, Inspector, but an illuminating one." Denton frowned. "I'll want statements from all three of you. But first, Mrs. Godfrey told me something interesting." Miss Marple's eyes brightened. "Did she indeed?" "Yes," Denton said, drawing out a small folded page from his pocket. She recalled an incident from 1943, a fire in a council office, a sudden fire, quickly put out, and afterward several crates of documents were moved to the library for safety. Miss Marple nodded slowly. The crates
Don't
Colonel
lie to me,
Ashbury
Tabitha.
mentioned.
I know
Yes,
you took the
and according
documents.
to Mrs. Godfrey,
Please,
those
Inspector,
crates
I didn't do
contained war
anything.
tribunal transcripts, records from
True,
local
I tell you.
hearings about
They're calling it
collaboration and
murder now.
profiteering,
But who would have
sensitive
known?
records,
Everyone
potentially
knew.
damaging.
It was only a
Tabitha
matter of
gasped.
time.
Mr. Harkort froze. Denton continued. And the councillor who oversaw the transfer, Mrs. Harcourt's father. Silence thickened the air. Miss Marple spoke gently. "It appears, Inspector, that the secret behind the wall may not be a crime, but an accusation. One likely proven false, but feared
Be
all the
careful
same."
out there today.
Mr. Harcourt's voice cracked.
The mood in the village
"So it
has
really was
changed.
only records." Miss Marple nodded. "I suspect so. But fear turns shadows into monsters." Denton looked between them, which means someone killed Price
Tell
to
me,
prevent
Tabitha,
old
are
accusations,
you quite certain there is
possibly
nothing
baseless
in
from
this library that
resurfacing.
frightens you?
Miss Marple looked toward the windows, where afternoon light stretched into the hall. "Someone," she said softly, "whose fear outweighed their conscience." Denton lowered his voice. "Mrs. Harkort." Miss Marple shook her head. "No, not her. Her reactions were defensive, not cunning, and she was never
not
out
the
of sight
wall.
long enough at the fete."
But what people
Her gaze
believe
turned
is
slowly
that.
to Tabitha. Tabitha stepped back, shaking her head violently. No, I didn't. I would never." Miss Marple raised a calming hand. "My dear, I do not suspect you." Tabitha burst into tears. Miss Marple continued, voice soft but firm. "But I believe you know who did." Tabitha froze.
It was
Denton
a
moved
dangerous
closer.
thing,
"Miss Rowe, this is
and it
important."
destroyed
Her lips
my family.
trembled. I found him at the library 2 days ago. Mr. Price. He was reading the old tribunal notes. He looked so triumphant. He said he'd finally uncovered something that would make Renford take him seriously at last. Miss Marple nodded. "Go on." "He wasn't alone," Tabitha whispered. "Someone else was with him. Someone who begged him not to reveal anything. Someone who said it would destroy people." "Who?" Denton demanded. Tabitha
Talk,
closed
Tabitha.
her eyes.
I'm running out of
It was
patience.
Mr.
Where
Pennington.
did you hide it?
Denton's eyes
don't know
widened.
anything.
"From the choir." "Yes,"
swear I
Tabitha
don't.
cried. "His
How
father was
dare you
implicated
mention
in
the
those
Harkort
hearings.
name in connection
Not
with that
convicted,
sordid
but
affair.
accused. He's
We've
lived
kept
his
that
whole
secret
life under
buried
that
for
shadow.
40
And he
years.
said if those documents resurfaced, he'd be ruined. His dignity, his post, everything." Miss Marple nodded sadly. "A man who
It's
lives
quite all
quietly,
right,
but
my
feels
dear.
humiliation deeply." Tabitha wiped
You
her
are
cheeks.
safe
He gave
now.
Price lemonade the moment he arrived at the fete.
Mrs.
"I saw
Harkort
him.
knew what her
I didn't
father
think
was
anything
doing in
of it."
43.
Denton swore softly.
both
He
knew,
was close to
and they
everyone.
let those men
No
die.
one would suspect him. Miss Marple sighed. Such is often the way with the quiet ones. Denton straightened, urgency overtaking him. "I must find him."
This
Miss
office
Marple placed
will
a
be
hand on his
sealed.
sleeve. "Be gentle. He is dangerous only in despair, not malice." Denton hurried out, the lantern
Evidence.
swinging at his side. Miss Marple watched
Evidence.
him go, her expression tinged with sorrow. She knew from long acquaintance with human frailty that some tragedies were born not of wickedness, but of unbearable shame. Behind her, Mr. Harkort sank into a chair,
The human heart
shaken
is a
but
dark
relieved.
place,
Tabitha
Denton.
clung to Miss Marple's arm.
And these walls
"Will it all
hold
be all
more
right
than
now?"
just secrets.
Miss Marple stroked her hand. "It will be, my dear. Truth is a most frightening thing, but it is also the only thing that sets troubled hearts free." And as she stood in the quiet library, the old south wall loomed beside her, no longer ominous, only weary, a relic of a fear that had lived too long in darkness. Soon, at last, it would see the light. The afternoon sun slanted low over Renford as Inspector Denton returned to the library, his expression grave yet composed. Behind him walked Mr. Pennington, shoulders stooped, hands bound gently at the wrists, though no force was needed. He moved like a man who had already surrendered long before anyone reached him. Miss Marple, seated quietly near the reading table, closed her notebook as they entered. The rustle of paper seemed oddly loud in the hush that followed. Pennington stopped before her, his face pale but calm. "Miss Marple," he murmured, "I suppose you've known for some time." She regarded him with that soft, piercing kindness that made hiding anything from her nearly impossible. "Not for long, Mr. Pennington, but long enough to wish you had chosen differently." Denton cleared his throat. He confessed. Said he feared Price would reveal evidence that would condemn his father all over again, even after all these years. He thought stopping Price would put the past to rest. Pennington bowed his head. "I never meant for it to go so far. I only wished to speak with him, persuade him." But he laughed, said history doesn't care for dignity, that he intended to unveil the truth for his own advancement. There was lemonade there. I used only a drop, enough that he'd fall ill, not. His voice cracked. "I didn't think it would kill him so quickly." Miss Marple sighed, a sorrowful sound.
Mr. Price would
Poison
actually
seldom
move
respect
forward.
nuance, Mr. Pennington, and desperation clouds judgment.
You were there
He
that
closed
night,
his
weren't you?
eyes.
Tell me what you
I only
saw.
wanted peace.
I saw
for my
nothing,
father,
Inspector.
for myself.
You're
But
grasping at
peace built on
shadows.
silence, Miss Marple said gently, is never peace at all. Denton signaled the constable, who guided Pennington toward the door. The librarian's footsteps faded down the corridor, soft as falling ash. When they were gone, the inspector turned to Miss Marple, looking as though he
How
wished both
dare
to
you?
scold and
I have
thank her at
absolutely
once.
no
"You
idea
saw
what
it
you're talking
before any
about.
of us,"
I
he
deny
said.
everything.
"How?" Miss Marple rose, brushing a speck of dust from her sleeve. "Oh, it was nothing extraordinary, Inspector. Only the usual pattern of human nature. A man who worries too much about propriety, who inserts himself into every village matter quietly, who hides embarrassment beneath officious behavior. Often such a person has suffered deeply from old wounds." "And the wall?" he asked, glancing toward the silent, impenetrable structure. "That wall
day to
hid
you."
records,"
And
she
you,
replied.
Inspector?
"But the true secret, the one worth killing for, was never in the stones. It was in the heart of a man who carried shame he did not deserve," she added, almost to herself, "and in the hearts of those who feared shame more than justice." Denton exhaled
How could you
heavily.
let this happen? The
"What
whole
shall we
town
do
knows
about
our
the
secret
wall?
now.
The county will want
It wasn't
answers
my
now."
fault. You were the one who
"Open
spoke
it,"
first.
Miss Marple said simply. "Let the truth rest in daylight at last." He nodded and stepped outside to confer with his men. Left alone for a moment, Miss Marple walked slowly toward the south wall. She traced one
Inspector.
gloved hand along the cool ancient
Wait
stones.
for me.
They had stood through war, grief, secrecy, and fear. They would stand long after today, but their burden, at last, was ending. Tabitha appeared beside her, quiet as a shadow. "Do you think it will be awful?" she whispered. "What they find?" Miss Marple smiled gently.
The wall.
"Oh, my dear, I expect they will find
Thicker
nothing
than
more
it
than
should
old
be,
papers,
almost a
faded
yard.
ink, perhaps a truth that was never so dreadful as
It
people
is the nature of
imagined.
denial
It
that
is
puzzles
fear
me
that grows
most.
dreadful,
Why did Mrs.
not
Harkort
truth.
not inquire
Tabitha's
into the rumour?
shoulders eased.
Because, Denton,
"I'm
she
glad you were
already
here,
knew the
Miss
truth.
Marple. I don't know what would have happened without you." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Nothing so terrible, I hope. But I am always glad to help where I can." Outside, the inspector called orders, and workers began assembling tools to open the wall. The villagers gathered cautiously along the green, curiosity softening into relief. The storm of rumor was passing, giving way to the gentle hum of ordinary life returning. As Miss Marple stepped into the doorway, she glimpsed Mrs. Harkort standing alone under the elm tree, hands
sealed
clasped,
space.
gaze distant. Not triumphant, not vengeful,
sealed
only
space.
tired. The truth had frightened her for so long
We should
that she
speak with
hardly
the
knew
oldest
how to face
residents
its
of
release.
Renford.
But
Their
when her
memories,
eyes
though
met Miss
fading,
Marple's,
might hold
there
the
was a
key.
small,
I suppose
grateful
they
nod,
might.
not
Very
of
well.
victory, of understanding. Miss Marple returned the nod with a warm one of her own. She walked back through the village lanes, the scent of early evening settling softly around her. The cottages glowed with lamplight, and the church bells began their slow, reassuring toll. Another disturbance in the quiet world had resolved itself, not without pain, not without consequence, but with clarity. As she reached her garden gate, Miss Marple paused. looking back once more toward the library tower rising above the rooftops. The trouble with secrets, she murmured to herself, is that they never stay quietly buried, not when they touch the heart. She opened her gate and stepped inside, her roses nodding in welcome. The village of Renford, its balance restored, exhaled around her like a gentle sigh. Miss Marple went in to make her evening tea, as calm as ever, serene in the knowledge that human nature, with all its flaws and fears, would always reveal itself to those patient enough to see.